Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, October 31st, 2025, and our friend Martin Armstrong is here with us. Welcome back, Martin.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Martin, 6 days ago, I've received an email from you that you were to meet people in Washington and you were afraid of the escalations between the West and Russia in Ukraine.
Mhm.
What what is new in your opinion? What is going on in terms of those people who are responsible for the policies in Ukraine in the United States?
Well, I was surprised to be called in. Um, but I guess they know we have offices around the world, so they know I got back channels in every which direction. um, and so they did mention that. They said it would be beneficial if you could possibly use your back channels. Um, and I think I managed to at least scare them into blinking. Um, I explained, look, when Khrushchev had to back down in 1962 over the Cuban Missile Crisis, a coup took place, and then Brezhnev came in. Okay, then you got the whole, the real hard line Cold War. When um, in '91, when Gorbachev came to power, um, Reagan wanted to go meet him. Um, I mean, I was doing some work for the Reagan administration back then, so I know what actually happened. They were telling Reagan, all the neocons were against going. They did just about, um, most people don't realize, but they practically staged a coup against Reagan. I mean, they went to Congress telling them to overrule him. They did everything in their power to try and prevent him from even meeting Gorbachev. And, I haven't really read recent history books if they tell the truth or not. But, I mean, Reagan should get a lot of credit for standing up against the neocons. And he said, take it, stuff it, and he went. Um, then what happened, as I published in the book that's The Plot to Seize Russia, which is on Amazon, right in the very beginning of it, I got a hold of all the Clinton declassified documents. And so right there in the very beginning, I put the declassified document. It shows that Russia was invited to join NATO. Most people don't know that. That then sparked the Russian neocons to stage coup number 2. And they went to overthrow Gorbachev. That's when Yeltsin stood on the tank and all of that, because they saw it as if he took that deal, joining NATO, it was a surrender to their arch enemies, the neocons on the other side. So what I warned them about was, and I guess I was the only one saying that, I said, if you really think you can embarrass Putin and force him out, I said, you got another thing coming. I said, because first of all, they know this is not a war with Ukraine. This is a war with NATO. And if he backs down, their neocons are likely to stage coup number 3. And what are you going to get? You're going to get nuclear war. Simple as that. All right. I mean, I said, if I have a gun and you're coming into my house and you intend to kill me, not just rob me, you intend to kill me, I'm going to shoot back. All right. And I had sources that were at the meeting between the foreign minister of China with Kalis. So I know what really happened. I don't know what the news basically said or not, if they ever told the truth. But she was trying to get China to tell Russia to surrender, get out of Ukraine, etc. And he said to her, um, he said, "We are not prepared to see Russia, lose." And she was kind of surprised. And he said, "Because we know we would be next." And so I knew what took place in all the back channels and stuff. So I said, I think maybe that's why they called me in and why they actually did listen for once. So I got a text message. I think it was yesterday morning, saying, "Look, negotiations are going on. Good, thank you." Now, the EU has paused giving Russian assets to Zelensky. I said, that's got to stop. And I did ask when I was called in, I said, is this sanctioned, or is this something as an opposition to Trump or whatever? And I was told no, it was sanctioned, and that I was approved to come in. I had clearance anyhow. I mean, I knew that, but so that was encouraging. When I told them, the last time you had Kalis out there saying that we're not at the table, whatever Trump does, we're not going to honor it, etc. So what I suggested was that we tell her and the rest of her neocons, this is not our proposal. You already signed the Minsk agreement. So you don't need to be at the table. You already signed it. And so did Ukraine. Honor that agreement. Okay. And if you don't, I suggested that the United States withdraw from NATO. Then part two, Zelensky's out there telling everybody, this is going to be the biggest investment opportunity of European history to rebuild Ukraine. All right. He expects to get trillions of dollars. Yeah. My suggestion to force that little twerp basically to sign that Trump issue an executive order, and no American company is allowed to invest 10 cents directly or indirectly in Ukraine. Cut Larry Fink off at the knees. That will then force that pretend, representative of Ukraine. I mean, his polls are down to 23%. He knows he doesn't stand a prayer in hell of winning any kind of election, which is why he won't do it. And honestly, most Ukrainians I speak to, they said if he was on fire, they wouldn't urinate on him until he was dead. All this, there'll be no election until, as long as the war goes on, which is self-serving. I mean, he's basically set himself up as a dictator, and he knows he can't win. So what's the incentive for him to even do peace unless you're stuffing, trillions of dollars in his pocket? So those are the two main things that I've suggested to force them to comply. And the Donbass should be allowed to vote I said, look, this is a basic human right. When Czechoslovakia broke up, it was Czech Republic, Slovakia. Yugoslavia broke up according to ethnic lines. Serbia, Croatia, Montenegro, Albania. That, we're not talking about, some new theory here. I mean, that whole region, as you know, it's there's such ethnic hatred that goes back, hundreds of years, if not thousands. Like I said before, you gave a handful of jets to Greece and made the front pages. Oh, now we can do a sneak attack on Turkey, another NATO country. I mean, the hatred between the Turks and the Greeks go back to Alexander the Great. You're not. These are not things that are you're ever going to change. As I told them, I said, we're not playing Monopoly here. Okay, I'm not going to give you Boardwalk for Park Place. This is, you're getting into ethnic cultures. It's my God against your God. These are not things that are negotiable. Like Iran versus Israel. It's they're not going to become friends. They're not going to go. Iran's not going to come and go to their synagogue. I mean, come on. These things are well entrenched, and they're going to stay there for years. So let's talk about reality rather than fiction. And why should the Donbass do anything with Ukraine when Ukraine is the fatherland of ethnic cleansing? Historically, they've killed more people, Poles, Jews, Russians. I mean, that's why they joined Hitler. Hitler promised, to give them a country. So you had their national hero Bandera killing anybody that didn't have basically Ukrainian blood. And this is why, the Donbass move for separation, because they hate them. You really think they're going to treat them decently? He's outlawed their language. Zelensky's outlawed their religion. I mean, come on. If the United States outlawed Spanish or Canada outlawed French, I think you're going to see civil wars there too. There's certain things you can't do. So, Zelensky is not, if you just look at what his actions are, he's not, a guy to be trusted. One of my sources over there was an American, Laura, and Zelensky had him arrested, and magically he dies of pneumonia in prison. He's the one that would call him a cokehead, doing all the investigations on him. Oh, he gets arrested for what? Being pro-Russian? And then magically dies of pneumonia, so you didn't take care of him either, even if that was true. So I have no respect for Zelensky whatsoever. And I don't even see him even remotely being possible to even retire in Ukraine. They tried to assassinate him in May of last year. He fired all his Ukrainian bodyguards, and now his bodyguards are basically MI6 and US. He doesn't even trust Ukrainian people. But nobody wants to tell the truth about this. The press is all propaganda. They just, whatever the neocons tell them to write, they write. As soon as you see a story that says, Russia invaded unprovoked. Really? It was Kiev that started the Civil War. Washington Post even did, when they found out that Zelensky knew when, Russia was going to cross the border, they interviewed him. they asked him, why did you not warn your people? His response, it's right in the Washington Post. Well, if I did, it would have cost me $7 billion. He wanted as many civilians killed so he could blame Russia. This is what they do. If you look at World War II, I mean, more civilians died than soldiers. That's always the case.
Martin, when it comes to Washington, you've been there, and I would wonder what's going on in their mind in terms of the way that they're letting Europe to run the show in Ukraine. After all, looking at the Trump administration, it to me, he's not happy with the case of Ukraine, but he's not willing to go hard to put pressure on Europe. Specifically, I'm talking about the United Kingdom. As you mentioned, the United Kingdom is, in my opinion, is running the show in Ukraine. They have their, MI6 is supporting bodyguards, and those people who are protecting Zelensky in Ukraine are mostly, British.
Right.
And so, don't you think that as time goes by, if let's assume that somehow they convince the Trump administration just to provide them with, from 2% to 5%, which would never happen, in my opinion, but putting that in place, and, what else they can bring to the table to convince him to continue the conflict in Ukraine, after all, in your opinion?
What I'm concerned about, and I did warn them, is that when you are looking at the ultimate economic decline of the EU, and I think this is also part of why I was called in. All right. You had the finance minister of the UK and France hint that they may need an IMF bailout. All right. And I've warned them that, look, Europe is going to collapse. And because it's in an economic decline of unbelievable proportions, this is why they need war. I mean, if you just look at the decisions that they did, you had COVID lockdowns, lost a lot of small businesses. Then you had the climate change, same thing. Then they put sanctions on Russia. All right. And then this was the 19th package of sanctions. So the first 18 didn't work, right? It's where they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, and my concern is that they are only interested in their power, and they don't care about the people of Europe. They don't think about it twice. All this is about retaining power. And, as I've said before, when I was called in to help create the euro, I explained, look, we have to consolidate the debts if you want to compete with the dollar. And Herman Kohl wouldn't let that happen because he said if he allowed the German people to vote, he would have lost 7-3. So he took Germany in unilaterally. And what he did was insisted upon no consolidation of the debt. And this also, I think, scared them because I explained, I'm a trader. I'm not an academic. All right. Academics deal in theory. I got to deal in reality. And the difference is that I said, look, in the United States, the reserves of banks are U.S. treasuries. They're not, the debt of Illinois, or Chicago and California. If California went bust, the traders are going to say, who's next? Oh, Illinois, let's short that one. All right. So in Europe, you have no federal debt. So for argument's sake, if France goes into, needs an IMF bailout, what are the traders going to do? They're going to look at which banks have the most French debt because that's their reserve. Then they're going to start shorting those banks. So you're looking at undermining the banking system of Europe. Then on top of that, on average, 70% of the pension funds must have government debt. All right. We're looking at the meltdown of the EU. And I warned them, I said, look, I seriously doubt if the EU is going to be able to survive past 2030. All right. Economically, they are a basket case. Germany, which is 25% of the EU, is actually shrinking in number of jobs. They've shrunk at least 3%. All right. And you even have Merz. To my surprise, he actually came out publicly and started criticizing the EU about their migrant policies, etc. And this is the real problem behind the EU. Once you create a centralized government, it's all about power. And when I was called in to create the euro, I warned them. I said, unless you consolidate the debt, the euro will never compete with the dollar. Because as a fund manager, I can pick up the phone, I can say, buy me, $20 billion worth of US treasuries. When it comes to Europe, I still make the same decisions as if the euro doesn't exist. Do I want France? Do I want Germany? Do I want Italy? Nothing's changed. All right. So, oh yeah, you got the euro. That's very nice. It's got nothing to do with the debt. And so basically you're looking at an unstable situation. And it's when back in 98, when I sat down and told them, I said, this is not going to be sustainable long term. I was told, we just have to create the euro. We'll worry about the debt later. Okay. And that's what I mean. It was all about power. We just have to create the EU. Then we'll worry about the problem after, right? So when you filter in the economic problems, this gives the EU the incentive to want war because they need an external enemy. You blame Putin for everything under the sun. Like Biden, when he put the sanctions on Russia and gasoline prices went up, he called it Putin's inflation. They never call it their own. And so they need a distraction. And that's what this whole thing is about. And I warned them that, they will create a false flag. And my sources, which I tend to be very good, said there were no drones that went from Russia over Poland. That was all a false flag. And then suddenly you heard, oh, we got to put a no-fly zone over Ukraine and all this other kind of anything they possibly can do to create war. You got Macron saying, we'll send in troops. Oh, you killed one Frenchman. That's it. World War III. They have no respect for the people that die on the battlefield. Zero. Absolutely zero. And we're just pawns on a chessboard to them. And it's all about retaining power. And so maybe I scared the shit out of them. But this is it. I mean, it's it does. the economic forecast for the EU is not my personal opinion. This is the computer doing this, and that the computer's never been wrong on this stuff. So they understand that. So I guess again that's part of the reason that they end up calling me in, because it's not, everybody's got an opinion, but this isn't my opinion. So I do think that it was interesting, the fact that I was called in to begin with. I was surprised, but I was even shown the KGB turned over the JFK files. They were about that thick, all right? And I knew about them a long time ago. And they said, you do know what we're doing right now is why they killed JFK. I said, yes, I know. He wanted peace with Russia, and the CIA neocons took him out. Just like the neocons took out, over there, Khrushchev and Gorbachev. Everybody's got their neocons, and I don't know. I've had dinner with some of these people, and I told them, look, I've tried my best to understand their thinking process, and I can't. All I can say is it's primordial, just hatred. That's it. And I see this as a real problem for the neocons. Growing up from the 50s and McCarthy and Red Scares, and they just hated communists. So when communism fell, oh, what happened? I still need an enemy, So I explained. I said, look, the only thing I can offer you is that they're just pissed off that communism fell, and they spent their whole life and they didn't get to shoot anybody. That's I couldn't explain it any other way. I said the same thing with the Middle East. I warned them. I said the prospects of a long-term peace deal, I said probably zero. You've got Hamas, the same thing. These are guys who have been raised from kids hating Jews. Do you think they're suddenly going to say, "Oh, kumbaya"? Certain, when you're raised like that, and they're just, you're turned against a group with such hatred. Doesn't matter. Like I said, when Gorbachev, when Reagan went to go meet with Gorbachev, they couldn't call him a communist. So, I was there. What they said was, you can never trust a Russian. So it turned from communism to just racism. There's no rational reasoning with these people. You look at, I put the video of Lindsey Graham meeting with Zelensky. This is the best money we ever spent to kill Russians. What if he said that about blacks or Muslim? It's okay to say about Russian, but nobody else. It's very sadistic. And then he smiles when he says it.
Martin, your take on the situation with the Trump administration is that somehow, somewhere down the road, they know what would happen to the case of Ukraine, or they don't have, as we talk. We talk about every day, we're talking about the new escalations, the new events happening, new attacks happening in that region, but we don't know what is in their mind. Do they know what do they want from Ukraine?
No, that's basically what I was in this report, which anybody can pull down. I decided to put it out openly for everybody. Um, because most of what's out there that is in the media is propaganda anyhow. Um, and like I said, this has got nothing to do with Ukraine anymore. It was started to weaken Russia, and very good sources that even said that from the very beginning. It had nothing to do with Ukraine. Um, and you look at the Balkans. NATO bombed Serbia, not Croatia. Why? Because the Serbs were pro-Russian. Okay, this is the same thing. You got, the Donbass, they're Russians. They're our enemy. That's NATO's enemy. They're not going to be there to help them. Humanitarian. That's all bullshit. Total bullshit. So I've warned them, and I've shown, the computer says that Ukraine goes flatline. We're not, the form of government they have there is the government is, even the IMF, the Panama Papers, everything is shown. They are the most corrupt government in the world, period. And you talk to anybody in the surrounding countries, even before this war. All right, they all said the same thing. If you shake hands with a Ukrainian, don't count your fingers. Make sure you still have your arm. They're not. I think Bandera basically just created such ethnic hatred that's systemic there. And that's the problem. It was like, if they don't have Ukrainian blood, kill them. I mean, it's all been documented. They even horrify the German Nazis. They would cut a baby out of a Jewish woman's womb and sew in a live cat. This is all documented. Crucified people. The number of Jews they killed horribly, as well as Polish, Hungarian. It's completely dehumanized. Ukraine is more than just neo-Nazis. It is the motherland of ethnic cleansing. And some of that was going on with between the Serbs and the Croats, etc. But this makes that pale as a minor incident if you look at the history of Ukraine. And that's why, you still have, groups over there running around with Nazi signs on. Nobody wants to admit it, because we have to hate Putin and not Ukraine. But, this is the reality of it. And I don't see Ukraine surviving long term. Look, I do have a video on my site, which I gave to them. I was surprised they didn't have it. It's a video of Zelensky before he was president as a comedian on stage. And what's he saying? He's making jokes about confiscating the assets from Russians and Jews. All right. The truth of Zelensky is like Soros. All right. He married a Christian girl. His children are baptized. All right. People I know in Israel, they say he's no Jew. All right. He suddenly became Jewish only after the election. Why? Because he was a neo-Nazi before. And this even, Trump in the last meeting said, Zelensky He just hates Putin, period. So when you put your personal hatreds and vendetta, how can you represent the Ukrainian people? I just hate Russians, so I'm not going to agree with him. Yeah, fine, kill another million Ukrainians, but I'm not going to do this. It's, I don't know. I have no respect for him whatsoever. So, and I think, they knew that. So that's one of the reasons I was surprised being called in.
Martin, what is the role of bankers, the city of London in Ukraine? And how do they have any sort of leverage on the Trump administration? I'm talking of the city of London.
I don't believe so. Look, the delusional idea is um, that they can conquer Russia, get the 75 trillion in natural resources that they have, which is twice the size of the U.S. national debt. And then Europe and the British Empire will rise to the pinnacle of the earth again. All right. This is really a delusional view. When you'll recall when Trump came out and said, oh, well, yeah, Russia's a paper tiger. Ukraine can keep all its land and go take more. Okay. He was being sarcastic because this is what the neocons in NATO are saying in Europe. Russia, don't worry about it. I've heard the excuse that, Putin will never use nukes because he knows it will blow back on him. They are out there saying that they have 3.4 million troops in NATO, which includes the United States and Canada, against Russia's 1.5. Therefore, they can just walk in, take Russia. Putin will drop to his knees and beg for his life. This is the propaganda that they are telling these people. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard it. I said, you got to be kidding me. And that's why I said, you come into my house and I know you're here to kill me, I think I'm shooting back. I was at a meeting in Rome and I said, look, Hitler was at least more respectful. He seemed to like history. So you robbed all the paintings and everything that everybody had. He didn't want to destroy it. And he didn't bomb Paris because he thought it was pretty. I said, this time they lob one in here to get your ass, and there goes the Colosseum. I said, we're in a different game here. And the nuclear weapons have lost their deterrent value. And it's like they said, well, yeah, okay, fine. We can, blow up the world. They know that. We know that. So nobody will use that. We'll do it conventionally. So where's the incentive? That was the whole idea of nuclear weapons would prevent war. No more. That's gone. Most people don't know their history, but the first Neocon war was Korea. All right. And Eisenhower, Truman couldn't get a peace deal. Finally, when Eisenhower came, still couldn't get a peace deal. So what did he do? That's what started the whole nuclear deterrent arms race. He threatened Korea. We will do to you what we did to Japan at Hiroshima. You come to the table, agree to a peace, or that's what I'm doing. At the time, U.S. was the only one with a nuclear bomb. So obviously it's a deterrent. But at the same time, because you made that threat, China said, gee, we got to get nukes. North Korea, we got to get nukes. Because what happened was, from a diplomatic standpoint, okay, if you had no nukes, you didn't have a seat at the table to negotiate. All right. Otherwise, peace basically was not anything more than a privilege. That was it. You do what we say, and we'll give you peace. Otherwise, we're going to knock your teeth out. So that's what started the whole arms race, I guess you want to call it. It goes back to Korea. And fine. I mean, Eisenhower managed to get a peace deal, but at what cost? Long term.
Trump and his administration tried to do everything to force China and India not to buy Russian oil. And you know what's so amazing to me, Martin? Those people who voted for the Trump administration, MAGA, they're mostly against the war, these continuous and endless wars outside of the United States. You know, in terms of when it comes to the Middle East, to Ukraine, which is far more dangerous with when it comes to Taiwan. But what they get is, the new administration coming in, they're trying to do what the same policies, putting pressure on India, on China, doesn't work. Let's go after, 2 days ago, we had the US ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker. He said that, the new pressure, they're trying to pressure Slovakia, Hungary, just, is that possible to put pressure on them? They're receiving their energy, their oil and gas from Russia. They're, the only, and you looking at Europe, you've mentioned Europe, looking at Europe, two sane countries, if I were to mention, would be Slovakia and Hungary, because they don't want to fight Russians. And you
Right.
put pressure on them, what is the outcome for you?
Look, this is what I disagree with, maybe why I was called in. I understand the neocons. They think that they can wage war economically. All right. And they have never won once. They put sanctions on Cuba in 1960. They're still there.
Yeah.
All right. Iran, they put sanctions on to get rid of the Ayatollah, 1979. They're still there. Okay. This theory, and they used it for, even Iraq. And you can look at Tony Blair's apology on YouTube for Iraq. He said, we thought we were freeing them from Saddam. We didn't realize we were subjecting them to more sectarian violence. This is the neocon theory, that they can go in, bring down a country economically, which can no longer afford to wage war, and they win. And what I've heard is, I think it's delusional. They even said, if we remove Putin, the Russian people will give us a ticker tape parade and cheer us because they're oppressed. I said, really? Look, I argued with Bill Kristol back in the 90s. He wrote even the book that, to invade Iraq, right? He said, remove Saddam, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, and we'll bring peace to the Middle East. All three are gone. Where the hell's the peace? They are to put it mildly, delusional. And I disagree with these policies profusely. Um, again, I think maybe I got called in because of that. All right. They know him. I know some of these neocons, and I have no respect for them whatsoever. And but if you look at what they're doing, okay, we'll put sanctions on India. We'll put sanctions on China, stop them from buying Russian oil. We'll attack. We'll let Zelensky attack his energy and all that. Then Putin will fall and will walk in and say, "Thank you very much. It's all ours." This is the delusional neocon way of waging war. And historically, during the American Civil, the American Revolution, Britain, you can get them off of YouTube or eBay or whatever. Britain counterfeited American currency for the same reason, to undermine the American economy. Napoleon counterfeited British currency for the same reason. Hitler, he even made a documentary of it. He had Jews in the concentration camps engraving and printing fake British pounds to undermine the economy. This has been a strategy. It's been around for, centuries. There's no evidence it has ever worked. Those are three examples, and you can buy the counterfeit currency historically. Frame them up; they look very nice. But so the neocons, I believe. I grew up in the Philadelphia area. Bill Kristol's father is the one that started the neocon movement, Irving. He was with Penn State over there, okay? The whole thing. Who went to school in Philadelphia and hung out with the Kristols? Netanyahu. I believe they used Netanyahu to get into Trump. Trump, I think, wrongly viewed him as just the head of state when he's basically part of the neocon movement. It's just a philosophy that's pretty much it. And we bring peace by killing all our enemies, basically. And so I think that's how they got in. Because after 2 attempted assassinations, you would think that Trump would be a little bit smarter than say, what the hell's going on here? But so I think they used Netanyahu to get in there. But look, all this is it's getting pretty crazy at this stage in the game. I'm doing what I can. At least they called me in, and I'll scream at them as loud as I possibly can. And people should know that when they had passed a law that said if you take any money from a foreign government, you must register as an agent of that. And if you don't, you get like 20 years in jail or something. Because we have offices everywhere from China to UAE. And I probably deal with more governments than anybody, maybe even in history. I cannot take 10 cents from any government, period. Not even the U.S. So what it does is that it gives me, 1, the credibility, and 2, the independence. I'm not going to show up there and tell them what they want to hear because I want to keep my job. So I don't hold anything back, and if they're wrong, I tell them they're wrong. That's it. And you don't like what I say? Fine. Have a nice day. Goodbye. It's pretty much the way I look at it. It's so I have had people say to me, "Look, it's everybody knows that they can trust you after what they did to you. It brought you credibility." I said, "Well, I suppose that from that perspective, it did." But there are definitely people that are try to usurp the power. If you look at the Biden administration, you have Garland, you had Blinken, and you had Victoria Nuland. Look at their background. All three claim that their families were from the Balkan area. All three claim that their families were persecuted by Russians. How do three people with the same background manage to get in the Biden administration? You have, a president that basically was not all there. And they even wanted to run him for office again. Because this is what I said before. I back in the 90s, I was at least part of the vetting process for people who wanted to be president. And they would send me in to explain how the world really works, etc. And then 1999 came. And I was asked, and I swear to God, I was asked, they said, "We want to send you down to go meet with Bush Jr." I said, "Okay, fine." I said, "Oh, but this one's different." I said, "What's different?" He said, "No, he's really stupid." I said, "Excuse me?" They use those words. And whereas before it was a vetting process, do you think he's smart enough to handle the job? So it did a 180-degree flip. And I said, "Why would you make somebody who's stupid president?" And I said, "He's got the name so we can win." So they picked the cabinet. They picked Dick Cheney. He really was the president. And everybody else. I was offered to take chief economic advisor in the White House. I said, "No, not interested. Thank you. I'm not giving up my company for that." And this is why when you can look at General Flynn's documentary, even he said the same thing I've said. Okay. When Trump first got there the first time, he said he was naive. Okay. And Trump didn't know Washington like I do it. So they told him, "Oh, you have to give confidence to the world. And so we need good people to be in the cabinet." So they picked the cabinet. They stuffed it with people like John Bolton, etc. And every one of them stabbed him in the back. That's why this time he picked his cabinet before he even got to Washington. He understood it this time. Okay. There's a learning curve. But look, this is Washington. And what you're looking at with Bush Jr., what they did by putting him in and then selecting the cabinet themselves, the bureaucracy, or what you would call the deep state, suddenly was running the country. They didn't need permission from the president anymore. They just did what they needed to do. Now they're finding that out with the Biden administration. Congress had just held that all the pardons done with auto pens, null and void. So So he just sticks in the machine. Yeah, he signed it. Here you go. You know, it really was abused to unbelievable levels. All right. But this is the problem. Okay. It's the deep state got a taste of that power, and it did not want to let it go. So, it's like NATO. I mean, NATO should have been shut down when communism fell. They were there as the pawn on the other side of the chessboard against the Warsaw Pact. Okay. And NATO has no purpose other than war. They will never promote peace. If there's peace, oh, Putin's a nice guy. There'll never be a war. You don't need them. Okay? They only get their pensions and jobs as long as Putin's going to invade maybe next week. All right? They have an incentive to constantly put out, beat the war drums. That's it. They're not interested in peace. They'll never accept it. That's why I said in this proposal, Europe signed the Minsk agreement. You honor it or we withdraw from NATO. Cut it off at the knees. It's a horrible institution. It's not independent. It's not honest. It's a retirement home for neocons. And every one of them that goes in there, oh, Russia's evil. They want to conquer Europe. For what? All right. And this, I also explained it to them. Europe has nothing. Okay. They got to get their energy from Russia. Okay. Saddam, who went into, Qatar for energy. There's nothing here. Japan went into Manchuria for assets. What does Europe have? Nothing. I said, Putin goes into Europe, all he's going to get is civil unrest, headaches. You're going to walk into France, and the French are going to say, are you going to pay our pensions now? That's it. There's nothing there of any value. And they equate it to Khrushchev. Now, Khrushchev was different. Khrushchev was a real believer in Marxism and Leninism. So to him, we will bury you was a philosophical issue. Communism is better than capitalism. Putin's not a communist. The Russian people have no interest in going back to communism. Neither does anybody in Eastern Europe. Everybody been there and done that. Thank you very much. Not again. Not even in China do you find that. So, this is, we have to be realistic here. It's all propaganda coming from NATO. You just had Lavrov come out. We guarantee not interested in attacking NATO. They get nothing out of it. They got more resources than everybody else, anyhow. Okay. They're not even developing that. The other part of the proposal I suggested was that all sanctions be removed. U.S. companies be allowed to go do joint ventures with Russia. Why? Because Russia has rare earths. All right. But they also have the expertise on how to mine them. And what people have to understand is that they're not necessarily rare. What's rare about them is that you don't find a concentrated vein of them. So they're kind of more spread out. So it takes a lot more different type of mining structure. And so Russia needs the capital. All right. So I explained to them, which did make their eyes open. I said, if we allow U.S. companies to go in and do joint ventures inside Russia with them. We guarantee, and Russia guarantees their assets are secure. What will it do? One, Russia is also dependent on China. China has a monopoly on rare earths. If the U.S. does a joint venture with them to develop it, it frees Russia from China. Okay, so we're back to square one where Nixon and Kissinger were trying to divide them. Our neocons have put them together. All right. Secondly, by doing that, it's sending a signal to NATO and to the rest of Europe. We are in there. Don't touch. Okay, so their eyes opened after I laid out all this stuff out, but look, being an international advisor, I learned a long time ago. You must look at the situation through everybody's eyes, not yours.
Exactly.
And if you can do that, then you got a shot. That's what Henry Kissinger was good at. He understood. You must look at it from their perspective. All right, not yours. So that's the only way to get two people that disagree with each other to agree.
Yeah.
And if we can't do that, then dig your own grave, because World War III will be coming. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Exactly.
But you just have these people that are. Look, I think it was Louis XIV on his deathbed. He said, "I think I have loved war too much." And that's what I see with these people. They do not care about who dies. I just got to win, like it's a football game or something, or a soccer game.
Yeah. Yes.
It's we beat them. That's it. Doesn't matter how many people died to do it or what's the consequences long term. They don't care. They really don't care.
Yeah, it's quite tragic.
What's tragic is that these people, like I said, with Garland, Blinken, and Newland, all three had to weasel their way in to get that high up in the Biden administration. And it was to basically, go against Russia for personal vendettas. Look up, the conflicts between Colin Powell and Madeleine Albright. She's the one that, sent NATO into Yugoslavia, into Serbia, bomb them and this. And I think in Colin Powell's memoirs, he even said, her arrogance was unbelievable. She said, "What's the purpose of having all these weapons if we can't use them? So let's blow up the world because I got them." It's they have no respect for humanity. I don't know how else to explain it. And
That's
she was, to me, she was just pretty ruthless. That's all.
Thank you so much, Martin, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Sorry we had some technical difficulties, but
yeah, but the problem solved. Yeah,
I switched to I got also Musk's satellite.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Thank you, Musk.
Thank you, Martin. See you soon. Bye bye.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.